again and again for eternity. This is essentially a metaphysical, moral fable, but Nietzsche insisted on treating it as if he believed in it. He described it as his formula for the greatness of a human being. This supreme and impossibly romantic stress on the importance of the moment is intended as an exhortation to live our lives to the full. As a passing poetic idea, it has some force. As a philosophical or moral idea, it is essentially superficial. It simply doesn't bear thinking through. The cliché, live life to the full, at least means something, however vague. The idea of eternal recurrence turns out on inspection to be meaningless. Do we remember each of these recurring lives? If we do, we would surely make changes. If we don't, they are of no relevance. Even an arresting poetic image, and this is one, must have more substance if it is to be regarded as more than mere poetry. It is simply too nebulous to be used as a principle, as Nietzsche intended. The Superman. Nietzsche's Superman had nothing whatsoever to do with the cloaked figure who flies through the skies of comic books. It might have been better if Nietzsche's hero had adopted a few of his namesake's comic values. Clark Kent at least has a naive morality, which he attempts to impose on a rough and ready world of good guys and bad guys. Nietzsche's Superman had no truck with such constraints as morality. His only morality was the will to power. Yet curiously, Nietzsche's descriptions of his Superman show him inhabiting a world as filled with naive simplicities as any comic. The prototype for Nietzsche's Superman was his Zarathustra, an impossibly earnest and boring fellow whose behavior exhibited dangerous psychotic symptoms. Admittedly, the tale of Zarathustra was intended as a parable, but a parable of what? As a parable of behavior. The parables that Christ preached in the Sermon on the Mount appear childishly simple, but on reflection are neither childish nor simple. They are profound. The parable on Zarathustra is childishly simple, and on reflection remains so. Yet its message is profound despite this. Nietzsche preaches nothing less than the overthrow of Christian values. Each individual must take absolute responsibility for his own actions in a godless world. He must make his own values in unfettered freedom. There is no sanction, divine or otherwise, for his actions. Nietzsche foresaw this as the 20th century condition. Unfortunately, he also made prescriptions as to how we should behave in this condition. Those who follow his prescriptions, the tedious antics of Zarathustra, would become Supermen. Alas, Nietzsche's Superman was to develop into more than the figure of comic fun that he so richly deserved to become. In Thus Spake Zarathustra, Nietzsche announces, through the mouth of his hero, what is the ape to man? A figure of fun, or an embarrassment. Man will appear exactly the same to the Superman. Thus Spake Zarathustra, first part, Zarathustra's Prologue, part 3. Elsewhere he proclaims, the goal of humanity cannot lie in its end, but in its highest specimens. Genealogy of Morals, Second Meditation, Section 9. In this context he begins loosely and misguidedly linking the Superman to such notions as nobility and blood, but he was not talking in aristocratic racial terms. He refers at one point to the Almanac de Gotha, an enclosure for asses. Will to Power, 942, revised edition 1906 or 1911. In the Hartel edition this remark has been left out, without indication. And announces on another occasion, when I speak of Plato, Pascal, Spinoza, and Goethe, that I know their blood rolls in mine. Mozartian edition 1920 to 1929 of Collected Works, 2198. A Greek, a Frenchman, a Portuguese Jew, and a German. All blood ancestors of the Superman, in Nietzsche's view. From Nietzsche's writings. Aphorisms and catchphrases. God is dead. Live dangerously. What is the best remedy? Victory. The Dawn, 571. There are no moral phenomena at all, only moral interpretations of phenomena. Beyond Good and Evil, 108. The best cure for love is still that time-honored medicine, love returned. The Dawn, Book 4, 415. Convictions are more hazardous enemies of truth than lies. Human, All Too Human, Volume 1, Section 9, 483. People who understand a thing to its very depths seldom remain faithful to it forever, for they have brought these depths into clear daylight, and what is in the depths is not usually pleasant to see. Human, All Too Human, 489. Even the bravest only rarely have the courage for what they really know. Twilight of the Idols, Maxims and Arrows, 2. Here Nietzsche is so fearless that he shows he is not even afraid of being hoist on his own petard. Public opinions, private idleness. Philosophizing. As an example of the sheer quality of Nietzsche's sustained philosophizing, here he takes apart our notion of truth and what it means, using a flawlessly true argument in the process. He arrives at a number of original insights en route, some of which are particularly timely in view of what we have done and are continuing to do to ourselves and the planet in the name of science. The implications of his argument remain as devastating now as they were then. What is this unconditional will to truth? What do you know from the outset of the character of existence which can enable us to decide whether it is best to be on the side of the unconditionally mistrustful or of the unconditionally trusting? Yet if both are required, much trust and mistrust, from where can science take its unconditional faith, the conviction on which it rests, that truth is more important than anything else, even than any other conviction? This conviction could not have come into being if both truth and untruth showed themselves to be continually useful, as is the case. So although there undeniably exists a faith in science, it cannot derive from such a utilitarian calculus, but must instead have originated in spite of the fact that the inutility and the dangerousness of the will to truth, of truth at any price, are proved to it continually. Therefore, will to truth does not mean I will not let myself be deceived. But there is no alternative. I will not deceive, not even myself. And here we are on the ground of morality. We must ask ourselves carefully, why don't we want to deceive? Especially if it appears, and it certainly does appear, that life depends on appearance. I mean on error, falsehood, deception, self-deception, and where life has, in fact, always shown itself to be on the side of the most unscrupulous multiplicity. Such an intent, interpreted charitably, could possibly be a quixotism, a degree of enthusiastic impudence. But it could also be something worse, namely, a destructive principle hostile to life. Will to truth. This could be a concealed will to death. So the question, why science, leads back to the moral problem, why is there any morality at all, if life, nature, and history are not moral? Yet you will have understood by now what I am driving at, namely that it always remains a metaphysical faith upon which our faith in science rests, that even we, modern scholars, we godless ones and anti-metaphysicians, still kindle our fire too from the flame which a faith thousands of years old has kindled. That Christian faith, which was also Plato's faith, that God is truth, that truth is divine. Gay Science, Book 5, Section 344. A related argument, only apparently contradicting the above, explains the demise of Christianity. Christianity comes to an end destroyed by its own morality, which cannot be replaced. A morality which in the end is forced to deny even the existence of its own God. The sense of truthfulness, so highly developed by Christianity, becomes sickened by the falsehoods and mendacity of all Christian interpretations of the world and of history. It rebounds from God is truth to the fanatical faith, all is false. Will to Power, Book 1, Introduction. One of Nietzsche's more sober prescriptions for superhumanity, and in many ways one of his more revealing. What makes heroic? To confront simultaneously one's greatest sorrow and one's greatest hope. What do you believe in? I believe that the weight of all things must be determined anew. What does your conscience tell you? You must become who you are. Where is your greatest danger? In pity. What do you love in others? My hopes. Nietzsche's Superman had nothing whatsoever to do with the cloaked figure who flies through the skies of comic books. It might have been better if Nietzsche's hero had adopted a few of his namesake's comic values. Clark Kent at least has a naive morality which he attempts to impose on a rough man, and again for eternity. This is essentially a metaphysical, moral fable, but Nietzsche insisted on treating it as if he believed in it. He described it as his formula for the greatness of a human being. This supreme and impossibly romantic relevance. Even an arresting poetic image, and this is one, must have more substance if it is to be regarded as more than mere poetry. It is simply too nebulous to be used as a principle, as Nietzsche intended. The Superman. Live life to the full, at least means something, however vague. The idea of eternal recurrence turns out on inspection to be meaningless. Do we remember each of these recurring lives? If we do, we would surely make changes. If we don't, their no stress on the importance of the moment is intended as an exhortation to live our lives to the full. As a passing poetic idea, it has some force. As a philosophical or moral idea, it is essentially superficial. It simply doesn't bear thinking through. The cliché